Good morning, everyone. We will get started with our class. Looking around, I see that so far anyway, it appears most of the men survived yesterday. So that must mean that not too many people were forgetful at the day of the year. You remembered something, I hope, right? Good. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But to me, we love each other because God loved us. And so Valentine's is a day that often is used to celebrate romantic love, and I'm all for all that mushy stuff. I like to encourage that. But also you can simply remember that love is a part of who we are and can be shown in many, many different ways. And that's all because God loved us first. So always remember that, regardless of whether there is any mushy stuff or not. This morning, we're picking up with our class on Satan's tactics, and we're continuing our study of how Satan comes after us. How Satan comes after us. The flock class is over next door today. They finally have a room to meet again, so they're over there. But today we're talking about discouragement. Discouragement. We've talked about a couple of these. We're in the D section. We've got another one next week that's also talking about a tactic he uses that starts with a D. But let's talk about discouragement. Once I turn my clicker on. The little switch on it goes the opposite of what you would expect. Usually you would think shifting up would turn it on, but in this one, shifting it down turns it on, so I'm always confused with that. First of all, let's realize that discouragement lives inside all of us. I don't think there's anybody in the building or anybody who will ever come in the building that is not susceptible to discouragement. We all have it in common. We try something and we fail, and we can get discouraged. We lose heart, we lose our courage to try again. It's as if instead of in courage, this is more like out courage. Right? I know encourage is spelled E-N, but that's really the idea of discouragement. It's like our courage has left us. Sometimes discouragement can come from poor or failing health. I can't get up and do the things I used to do. My dad really feels that way about getting around. He really, really wants to walk again, but I don't think he'll ever really get out of the wheelchair after having spent a year in the wheelchair because his legs and his muscles have really atrophied, and I don't think it would be a very wise, safe thing for him to be trying that. But so he gets discouraged. This last week, we finally got a contract on his house that's been for sale for 7 months. We needed to sell off his house, and so that caused him, when he was sitting with my sister, to say, I don't have a home, is what he told her. And she had to make sure that he knew that home is where your heart is, and that he was also named the King of Valentine's Day at the assisted living facility. So there must be a whole lot of ladies that think he has a whole lot of heart and are glad that he has a home there at the assisted living facility. But it can come, right? It's not always a rational thing, and I don't want us to approach it that way. We all know what we're talking about when we're thinking that we can get discouraged, poor or failing health. If we haven't felt that way, we've seen others who get discouraged because they just can't seem to do what they used to do. It can come from anxiety going on in our lives. Some of that can be from job stress, which I know a lot of us know about, or other anxieties and worries that we have. It can come from sorrowful events in our lives. We got roughly 180 people on average here on a Sunday morning, and that's a great size, but I'm still surprised at the number of people that we have lost over the last 12 to 18 months here. And so that affects us, right? You can get discouraged when you have some hard event that goes on in our lives. Some people, and this is what I wish perhaps we were to an extent, listen to me carefully, more discouraged about when people don't respond to the good news. That can be a preacher problem. They're up here pounding the pulpit all the time, and that people don't seem to change. That certainly was the case downtown, because you would try to encourage mostly the men who would come in, and they really struggled, perhaps because they were discouraged. But in this case, right, people not responding is not so much a reason to get discouraged, it's simply a reason to keep trying, because we are to plant the seed, to sow the seed, and if you sow it wide enough and often enough, it will grow. The seed's very powerful. You can also have failure with people and events, trying either to make peace where you've had problems in the past, or trying to set something up and it just doesn't work right. Discouragement can come from lots of causes, is really the point here. And really and truly, I think we know this happens to all of us. Surely it can't be a gene thing. Please, I hope some of you get discouraged too, if nothing else, just to make me feel a little better, lest I get discouraged, that I'm the only one who gets discouraged. But let's talk a little more. When we get discouraged, what are some signs that can pop up that can be consequences or results of getting discouraged? How would you potentially see it in somebody else or know? Well, one of the big ways I have seen discouragement occur is diminished prayer life. Whatever somebody's prayer life has been when things are going good, sometimes it'll go off the cliff. And that's really, to an extent, backward. It's backward. You get down, you get discouraged, things aren't going well, and I don't know whether it's that we sometimes will blame God for things not going well, or we quit talking to God because that obviously hasn't been doing any good, so my prayer life will go down. I would say that's counterproductive to do that. Our prayer lives need to increase when we get discouraged. When you think about it, growing up as a child, things would get us discouraged. I mean, what discourages an 8-year-old is different than what discourages a 16-year-old and a 26-year-old. But one of the benefits of when we were children is we were living with, mom and dad or our parents who had a lot more life experience and hopefully could share some encouragement to us. Jean, this girl that you had a crush on when you were 14, and she told you to get lost, the world is not over, right? It sure seems over to me, perhaps, as a 14-year-old or something like that. But, something? Dad was pretty smart, because the world was not over, and there were so many more wonderful things to come in the future. It's hard to see. Well, turning away, stop not talking to your parents as often when you were discouraged as a teenager or a child probably would mean you don't get the help that you need. You don't get that encouragement. Well, God is our Father, and so when we get discouraged, I would parallel that to our actions as a younger person. It's very good to talk with someone who loves you, who cares about you, and who knows a whole lot more than you do. And so God fits all of those, checks all those boxes, fits all of that. So diminished prayer life is the last thing you really should want to have show up when you're discouraged, but it often does. It often does. Sometimes people, when they get discouraged, are not as eager to help other people. It can be a woe is me kind of thing, and so you get very, very focused internally rather than externally. I think that's also counterproductive. One of the best ways to really make a difference in depression or discouragement is to quit. If you can find a way, and it's so tough, to not focus as much on me and my problems, but to be focused on other people. That's a very common suggestion made by therapists, is to get involved in the lives of others and see good things happening in the lives of others that are a result of your actions and things you were doing, and that can help you not feel as discouraged. It's the whole idea that it was tough to feel discouraged. Again, I'm using downtown a lot today because discouragement was so prevalent down at Lindsley Avenue among some of the individuals who would come. It's hard to stay discouraged on your own when you see somebody just overjoyed that they're getting a sack lunch to be able to eat this afternoon. And I think I've told the story of the mother and the daughter who were living on the streets. The mom was 70 and the daughter was 42, 41. And we had the big monthly meal that we had, and I was sat across talking to them the whole time. And I asked them after they'd been eating a while, I said, well, what has been your favorite thing, on the plate? Because we had had ham, we had had all sorts of vegetables and all these kinds of things. And the daughter looked up and said, having food. Now, I'm going to stay discouraged when we're trying to make such a difference in the lives of people. Well, it's one thing to see it right in front of you, but you all should know that you continue to make a difference through your generosity down to Lindsley Avenue to this day. I still have coats I haven't been able to get downtown because of timing, but getting involved in the lives of others is a fabulous way to address our discouragement, our being down. But unfortunately, sometimes it shows up immediately when you get discouraged by not being as eager or involved in helping others and withdrawing from others, not talking to your friends, not talking to people, quick to take off and not hang around and talk. We can all experience these things, and we all do. The problem that we don't really recognize is that it can make Satan's job pulling us away from God a whole lot easier. Think again about the number one, right? If I'm not talking to God as often, then Satan can be filling my head potentially with other things. I'm going away from the source of comfort. I'm going away with the source of encouragement and focusing on my troubles. And that's a bad place to be, because I think it does make Satan's job of trying to pull us away easier, or he can be more effective at what he's attempting to do. And again, his tactic, he wants us to be discouraged. You'll never get that. So you sinned again. Well, why do you keep trying? All these different kinds of things that can pop up into our minds that I would suggest are all part of his tactics. So I think it's very dangerous when we become discouraged, because we will take our eyes off of God and put them on ourselves, right? And that's what much of our life is supposed to be trying to overcome. I say in the invitation a lot, we've got to change our lives from living for ourselves to living for God, and discouragement has us focus on ourselves. It may not be focusing on wanting to go back to our sinful behaviors, which is part of the invitation process, right, of getting people not to be thinking that way. But when I'm focusing on how bad things are for me and how rough things are for me, and again, we all get to this point, then I'm not thinking and focusing on what God wants me to be. So by taking our eyes off God and putting them on myself, it's very, very dangerous from the standpoint of providing and opening a chink in the armor of God where Satan can find his way in, because we let him in. He encourages evil. One way he does this with discouragement is he encourages evil and discourages living for God. If Satan can get us to be thinking and living again in evil ways and sinful ways, then knowing we shouldn't be doing that can become this vicious circle and cycle of discouragement. And so here's a passage from Galatians 5, before we talk about the fruit of the Spirit. In verses 19 through 21, we read, "The acts of the flesh are obvious." This is not an exhaustive list. He ends with, "and the like." Right? So he's like, you all know what I'm talking about. He lists 10, 15 things here. He says, but there's a whole lot of other ones. Immorality, impurity, and debauchery. Those three words are all about the same thing, and we know what they are. So any of those things are works of the flesh. Those are not going to have you become closer to God. There's a place for those things, This is where they are not put in the proper place. Then you have idolatry and witchcraft. Well, I don't know that that's talking about the fiction of Harry Potter, but I think we don't have the idolatry and witchcraft today in the same focus as they did back then. But there are people today who dabble in the occult and do all sorts of things, right? The danger for us, I think, would be not so much necessarily the witchcraft, but the idolatry, putting things ahead of God. But so two broad categories here, right? Immorality, and then a focus on appealing to powers or seeking powers in the world that are not God. And then look at these next ones. Hatred, discord, jealousy, and fits of rage. Not controlling my emotions and not controlling my anger. And then selfish ambition. I want to get ahead even if I have to step on you to do it. Dissensions, factions, and envy. Divisions. And in fact, one of the categories of Satan's tactics we will talk about will be divisions. But in this case, right, dissensions, disagreements, wanting people to get mad and argue and fuss. The more we are doing this, the less we are doing that to the outside world. And so factions, partyism, sectarian ways of thinking within a congregation, all of those things, again, are designed to have us focused inward or at brother, sister, and it should never be that way. The world is on fire, as it were. The world is dying, and yet we're in here arguing over whether we should replace the carpet or what color the carpet ought to be, or whether we should have, think of all the things that we've heard about in the past. Should there be 2 songs before the Lord's Supper or 1? People, we get upset and want to argue and divide over so many things. Maybe we need to focus on telling the good news about Jesus more than arguing amongst ourselves. Then you have drunkenness, orgies, and the like. It kind of ends in some ways the way it starts. Alcohol is very famous for removing the ability to think clearly, and I think that's the real reason the do not be drunk statements are so often made in scriptures, because you're not thinking clearly when you can't think clearly, and it can lead back to the initial immorality discussion that he's having here. Satan wants people to do this. The world is very happy to be doing many of these kinds of things. And so if we have that as what we are involved in, then we're living for ourselves. This, go for all the gusto. That dates me a bit. You may remember the commercials on television going for the gusto ages and ages ago. You only go around once. Go for all you can get. Do what's fun. Don't worry about tomorrow. That's all Satan talking right there. Paul says, however, I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. That's one of the more direct statements Paul makes about those who are not going to inherit the kingdom of God, not going to be part of God's people in the world to come. That sure seems that that's a big part of why Satan would want us to live that way. Satan's goal is for us not to go home and live with God. And so Paul is trying to tell us here, if you live like this, you are not going to be going home to be with God. So if we have lived like this, we need to turn away from it. And that is not a light switch. Hopefully it's a pretty good light switch, but it is a process. And so you may continue to struggle with things over time. Remember, Paul in the book of Romans said, a wretched man that I am, I keep doing the things that I don't want to do. Paul struggled with we don't know what. So it is a process. Don't get discouraged if you are trying to live for God and continuing to have trouble. Do better today than you did yesterday. Let's talk about some situations where people could have had discouragement. Paul and Silas. This is in 2 Corinthians 4, 1 and 2. Paul writing here, says, therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, Paul and Silas, we have this ministry, we have this avenue of service, we have this ability to help people, to encourage people, to teach people, to make sure that members of God's family are continuing to become the kind of people God wants them to be. We do not lose heart. We don't get discouraged. We don't give up. And if you're familiar with the book of Acts, there are a lot of times Paul and Silas could have given up. They spent a night after being beaten on their rear ends, sitting on those beaten rear ends when they were in jail in Philippi, and ended up singing all night. I suspect I would likely not have been singing unless it was, what's the old song, Nobody Knows the Troubles I've Seen, as I had just been beaten in public earlier that day. They do not lose heart. He says, we reject all shameful deeds and underhanded methods. We don't try to trick anyone or distort the Word of God. We're not looking for an angle. We're not looking for a way to enrich ourselves or to trick people into becoming some of God's people. We teach the truth plainly. And that's the goal we all ought to have. That's a goal I want to have. I simply want to point people to Jesus, to teach the truth as plainly as I can, make it as simple as God wants it to be, and it should be simple. So that's our goal. Do not lose heart. Don't try to fool people, trick people. Don't be involved in shameful deeds, and to teach the good news about Jesus plainly, the truth. For this reason, he says in that same chapter, we never become discouraged. I've often wondered if that might have been some exaggeration. Hopefully not. To say we never become discouraged, I suspect, we're not going to become discouraged. I don't know. I know what it says. It says we never become discouraged, but that would be quite the feat. But it says, even though our physical being is gradually decaying, yet our spiritual being is renewed day by day. Every day when we get up, it happens slowly, right? You may not notice it every day, but there's one more step of the body not quite being as strong and hyper and all that kind of thing as it had been the day before. But the body is going to do that, right? We all are a little less energetic than we were when we were 6. You know what we say when we see the kids running around outside? We'll say, I sure wish I had that what? Energy. And we don't. But Paul says that's not the important thing. The important thing is that our inward self, our spiritual nature, our spirit living for God is renewed every day. So, yeah, okay, fine. I can't do necessarily everything physically that I used to do. Surprised? No. But whatever my physical situation is, I can find ways to still use my renewed spiritual being in my relationship with God to help people. What can I do? Well, you can sit on a couch with Dollar Tree greeting cards, which are like 2 for $1 or 2 for $1.25, and we've got a whole lot of shut-in people here. That's an easy thing to do. It doesn't require any kind of real physical effort. You got to write love you and fill out the envelope. And so that's something that doesn't require being as physically strong and hyperactive as we used to be. There are plenty of ways to continue serving as our life circumstance changes. So do not get discouraged. Paul in prison, in Ephesians 6. Also pray also for me that God will give me a message when I am ready to speak, so that I may speak boldly and make known the gospel's secret. It's not so much that it's a secret, it's the mystery, revealing what many people would not have known, pointing out that Jesus is the Messiah and he was not coming to set up a physical kingdom. Remember, the apostles didn't get that. Right before Jesus ascends to heaven in Acts chapter 1, the apostles say, it's almost like, one more question before you go. It's almost like the apostles are doing that. Are you going to give the kingdom back to Israel at this time? And you can imagine, again, another facepalm moment potentially from Jesus. I'm about to leave and you're still asking me these questions? So it has been tough for people to really understand, certainly in the first century, what Jesus was all about. It can be tough today. So that I may make known the gospel secret. For the sake of this gospel, this good news, I am an ambassador. I am sent forth to spread the news, to take the news from the ruler out to the people, though I am now in prison. Pray that I may be bold in speaking about the gospel as I should. Somebody sent to prison for something they didn't do or something that should not have been a crime could easily lead you to be discouraged. Paul's not discouraged. He's wanting people to pray for him that he may be bold in spreading the good news. Whatever circumstances we find ourselves, we need to be content and we need to always be spreading the good news. Paul could easily have been discouraged. Amazing that he was not. We may tend to ask questions like, well, why did God allow this to happen to me? Right? Why did God let this happen to me? No show of hands here, but I bet many of us either have thought that at some point. Maybe we got rid of it, hopefully pretty quickly, but we may have thought about that at some point, or we know people who have thought that. Why me, God? Why me? Why me? You know, if God really loved me, then this wouldn't have happened. Or thinking God has abandoned me. Does God even know I'm here? I would hear that downtown. And I would say, absolutely he does. And I believe he not only knows you're here, but that's one of the reasons you are in here today. Is because through providence, God has led you to find his people in the middle of downtown. Why should I pray? God doesn't seem to be there. If you pray often enough for the same kind of thing and nothing happens, you can give up. You can. These are powerful, but bad thoughts. So what to do? How do we address discouragement? How do we try to not let it get to us? A couple of ideas. Back to what we said earlier. Maintain your prayer life. Even pray more if you get discouraged, if things don't go well. Don't fall for the suggestion that God doesn't care. So what's the point in praying? Maintain your prayer life. Remember the persistent widow. Remember the parable? She had an adversary and went to the judge seeking justice, and the judge kept tossing her out. After all, from all appearances, she is this very unimportant widow. Maybe he kept turning her down, hoping for a bribe. You know, he was the unjust judge. And yet, because she bugged him to death, he gave her justice. And this was from someone who did not fear God and did not care about other people. But because she's bugging me so much, I will get to her what she wants. And Jesus' point in that parable is, how much more will your loving Father look after you and look after his people who cry day and night to him? Jesus told his disciples a parable to teach them that they should always pray. And look at the second part of that. The second part of the parable is never become discouraged. If there were a group of 12 people who could have become discouraged, it would have been his apostles. You know, you got Matthias coming in to take Judas's place. Tradition and history, who in the world knows if it's true, suggests that every one of them, potentially other than the Apostle John, died a hard death. Don't know. We know James was beheaded. We know James was put to death. But never become discouraged. Always pray. Then we look at 1 John 5:14. We have courage in God's presence. And remember, courage is part of the word discourage. So I'm going to keep playing on that idea. We need to be in courage, I-N, and not out of courage. Encouraged, not discouraged. We have courage in God's presence because we are sure that he hears us if we ask him for anything that isn't according to his will. Again, if I ask for a Ferrari, there's a Ferrari dealership right down the interstate heading into town near the airport. Boy, they look really good in those windows up there. You know, God, give me a Ferrari this morning. I know it's raining, but I'm sure the dealer can have it out there before the end of service. I'm going to pray all morning for that Ferrari. You know, first of all, his response to me might be, you know, well, how about you get out there and work hard enough at a job so you can buy that Ferrari if that's really what you want. But no matter what, that's not in any way I can envision something that praying to God about is going to be part of his will. Does God want me to have a Ferrari? It's not that having a Ferrari is necessarily evil, but is that part of his will for me? Am I going to be a better teacher of the good news if I'm all this kind of stuff? I'd probably wrap myself around a dozen telephone poles. That's probably not the best idea. We have courage in God's presence. Why? Because we are sure that he hears us. And he hears us if we ask for anything that's according to his will. It's always asking for things that he would want us to have. Ask for wisdom. Ask for finding ways to help people. Those are absolutely in accordance with his will. Ask for a way out of discouragement, out of problems that you have, and help me get past these so I can again be more productive and helpful to other people. Remember times God provided strength to others. Look at Hebrews 10:32. Here, the writer of Hebrews 10 is a great chapter. We often talk about Hebrews 11. Hebrews 10 has one of the strongest prophecies about Jesus in the first several verses. And we often will talk about, the need to be together when we read verses 25, 26, and so on. But look at verse 32. Remember the days when you first learned the truth. You had a hard struggle with much suffering, but you continued strong. Maybe that happened to us. Maybe it didn't. Right? It may be in our country, in our environment, in our communities, when we first learn the truth, when we first become a Christian, it might have been a wonderful time. There might not have been much suffering, but the devil goes after new Christians, sometimes with a vengeance. And that's one reason our teenagers can often make mistakes that older adults might not, because they're still new at this life thing. And the devil comes after them, and they don't have the 20, 30, 40 years of wisdom, hopefully, that some of us have who are older. And so you may have a hard struggle with a lot of suffering when you first learn the truth, but we've got to continue strong. God can give us strength to get through anything. We need to make sure our young people know that if you do, in fact, make a mistake, if you do something that is sinful, your life is not over. Look at all the people who made poor choices and yet still were strong servants and workers and hard workers for God. We're not the first ones who've had hard times. Remember Paul and Silas sitting in the prison at midnight and singing hymns to God. So the examples we have in the Bible encourage us to hang in there. Another way we can try to approach discouragement is to, this one's one of these, thanks a lot, Gene, this is real helpful. Resolve to avoid it. Decide you're not going to be discouraged. Well, remember Paul and Silas in Corinthians said, we do not get discouraged. They had their eyes on the prize. They knew which direction they were heading. Maybe this is a good thing for us. Look for ways to see it coming, to see that it's here, and walk away from it. Don't let it take root. The idea is that you just try not to let outside forces change who we really are. And who we are is God's people. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians, and he gives an illustration of an athlete. We got the Olympics going on. Hopefully you've seen a little bit. I don't know what will happen in the second week. It seems like all the Olympic events have pretty much already taken place. I mean, in the Summer Olympics, you have, gymnastics the first week, and then track and field the second week, so you get a whole new slew of events in the winter. What are they going to do in the second week? Let me see. I bet there'll be some skiing. I bet there'll be some skating. Okay, we'll see. I don't mean to diss the Olympics, but I've been watching, I like to watch curling. The whole idea of shuffleboard on ice is really interesting to me. And I don't know why they shout so loud. Watch curling and just listen to them shouting. Anyway, all right, that's a diversion. We talk about diversions coming up in a couple of weeks. Look at the illustration here. Sorry for the small print, but it's on your handout. 1 Corinthians 9. Surely you know that many runners take part in a race, but only one of them wins the prize. That's going on in the Olympics. Surely you know that many skaters are involved in the race, but only one gets the gold. Surely you know that many skiers come down the hill, but only one of them gets the gold. Surely you know that many curling teams, all these different sports that we have going on, right? Well, only one wins the prize. Run then so that you will win the prize. We need to finish the race. Turns out it's quite different than the Olympics. The prize is given to us for finishing the race, not even necessarily coming in first. With God, it's much more of a, I've never heard it used this way, and I'll have to think if I really want to use this term with it, but in some ways it's much more a pass-fail. You simply need to finish the course, and living our lives so that we can go home to live with God doesn't mean that I have to beat you or you have to beat me. We are all running the race to finish the race, living for God and telling people the good news as we go through it. So I'll have to think. If you don't like my pass-fail analogy, I'll have to think, see whether I like it too. But the whole point is it's not simply you get the gold medal or you're out. That's not it. You need to finish the race. Every athlete in training submits to strict discipline in order to be crowned with a wreath that will not last. All the training, some of these people moved to areas that were where winter sports were practiced. One woman I heard about yesterday was in the military. She transferred to a base that was an hour away from where the events were happening in the Olympics 4 years ago. She and her husband and family, so that she, when she wasn't on duty, could go and be practicing. That's a lot of commitment. Right? I really don't think if I got on a plane that I'd be able to go over there and do that skeleton tomorrow because I'm not prepared. I might be a skeleton after coming down the skeleton, but no, that's not it. You have to submit to strict discipline. You're going to give up the Big Macs. You're going to give up all the lounging about that so many of us may be doing, right? In order to be crowned with a wreath that does not last. They would have an olive wreath, right? That's what they did. They crowned them. Today, it's, gold medals and things like that. Some of those gold medals aren't lasting either. Several of them are broken. Gold medals don't last. All of it here is temporary. We don't do it for a wreath that will not last. We do it for one that will last forever. That is why I run straight for the finish line. Paul's trying not to get distracted, bouncing around, looking at other things. I run straight for the finish line. That's why I'm like a boxer who does not waste his punches. One of the versions talks about boxing the air. I think it's the idea of saving your energy for the punch that really matters. If you think of boxers, right, sometimes you see them and they're just back and forth. They're still 10 feet apart. You get the boos coming because they're obviously not trying to fight each other, stuff like that. Save your punches for when it matters. Save your effort for the things that matters. I harden my body with blows and bring it under complete control. I, again, discipline myself. I stay focused on what I'm trying to do to keep myself from being disqualified after having called others to the contest. In skiing down those hills, you've got to stay where you don't go outside the gates. That happened yesterday a couple of times. It was on in the background. I kept, something's happened. I need to look up. One poor woman went outside one of the gates. Automatic disqualification. Boom. After all those years of prep. Paul says, I keep my body hardened with blows. I keep myself disciplined so that even after having called others to join the race with me, Paul says, so that I don't become disqualified. And remember, there's a lot of people in this race. We're all running together. We need to look out for each other and encourage one another so we all stay moving in the same direction. Coming in first does not matter. Finishing the race matters. That's really key. Another way we can do this is to stay connected with Christian brothers or sisters to help avoid discouragement. Back to Hebrews 10. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. Why do we get together? Why is it encouraged of us to get together? It is so important to recharge our batteries, as it were. It's so important to interact with each other and encourage each other and stir one another up toward love and good deeds. That's why we get together. It is to worship God, but we get a benefit out of it by encouraging one another. Be a Barnabas. Be a son of encouragement. And allow yourself to be encouraged when you need it. Don't blow off things with, no, I'm fine. If you're hurting, tell somebody. If you've got a problem, tell somebody. If you feel discouraged, let somebody know, because we are family here and we need to encourage one another. And we can do that together by gathering together. It's as if God intends our gathering together to be a recharging time. God knew that batteries can run down before batteries even existed. Of course, God knew that they could run down. We charge our batteries up when we come together. We encourage one another, and that's so critical since Satan wants to come after us when our batteries are running low, when we are discouraged, when we are discharged, as it were. I get through my week better having been in this gathering with you. It encourages me. I want to encourage others. I hope we all do, because discouragement is such a horrible thing to feel, and it is such an effective way for the devil to get us off track and keep us from finishing the race. So I want to encourage us. Let's focus on encouraging one another this week. Don't let the devil find a way in. Assume that somebody needs encouraging, and just encourage all the time. Let's focus on that. Thank you for being in the class.